Hello, I'm David Miller. Welcome to my channel. And today we're going to take a look at the film Jumanji 4. And I'll say honestly right away, this is one of those movies where you immediately wonder, what else can they possibly come up with after the previous installments? But pretty quickly it becomes clear that the creators are trying not just to repeat the familiar formula, but to slightly expand the very idea of the Jumanji world. The only question is whether they managed to turn that into a full-fledged adventure rather than just another loud amusement park ride. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Jumanji 4 is a continuation of the popular adventure franchise that, at one point, rather unexpectedly, rebooted the classic story about a magical game. If the original film from the 1990s revolved around a board game, the newer series transformed Jumanji into a massive virtual world with avatars, levels, and game rules. The fourth installment tries to push that idea even further. The film is once again directed by Jake Kasdan, who also worked on the two previous films in the series. Among the producers are Dwayne Johnson, Hiram Garcia, and Matt Tolmach. The main roles are once again played by Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, Jack Black, and Karen Gillan, the team that has essentially become the face of the modern version of the franchise. The film's premiere in the United States is expected roughly toward the end of 2026, and it's already clear that the studio is placing a fairly serious bet on it. Let me say a couple of words from my own perspective. I went into this film with fairly clear expectations. After the third installment, the franchise ended up at an interesting point. On the one hand, audiences still love these characters. On the other hand, you can't repeat the exact same trick forever. So I was curious to see whether the creators would risk changing the structure of the story or choose the safer route. I watched the film in a regular theater, in a fairly calm setting, without festival buzz or marketing hype around it. And honestly, that allowed me to experience it as pure adventure cinema, without unnecessary expectations. If we talk about the premise without spoilers, the story once again brings us back to a group of friends who have already, and more than once, encountered the world of Jumanji. But this time the game changes. And it changes not just in terms of levels or scenery, but in the rules themselves. The characters once again find themselves inside the game world, taking on the forms of familiar avatars. Dwayne Johnson's strong but slightly awkward hero, Jack Black's sarcastic character, Karen Gillan's agile fighter, and Kevin Hart's nervous but resourceful adventurer. However, it quickly becomes clear that the world around them no longer operates according to the old rules. Now Jumanji looks less like a linear quest and more like a chaotic system of trials where the rules can change on the fly. The heroes try to figure out what happened to the game and why it has become so unpredictable. And behind that, of course, there is something bigger than just a new villain or another level. For the characters, what's at stake is not only getting out of the game, but also their own relationships with each other. Because, as often happens in this franchise, the adventure also becomes a way of figuring themselves out. My main thesis about this film is actually pretty simple. Jumanji 4 works best when it remembers that its strength lies not only in action and visual gags, but in the dynamics between the characters. When the film gives its heroes space to interact, joke, and stumble through awkward situations, it truly comes alive. But when the story gets too caught up in scale and spectacle, it sometimes loses the lightness that made audiences fall in love with the series. The script holds together fairly confidently overall, although you can occasionally feel the familiar problem of adventure franchises, the constant need to raise the stakes. The first 40 minutes work especially well. The characters get used to their avatars again, the game throws unexpected rules at them, and the audience, together with the characters, tries to understand how this new world works. But closer to the middle, the pacing begins to jump a little. The film either accelerates, throwing the heroes from one spectacular scene into another, or suddenly slows down to explain new game mechanics. The characters remain, perhaps, the main engine of the story. Dwayne Johnson once again plays a hero who outwardly looks like a classic, unstoppable adventurer. but inside is still the same teenager trapped in someone else's body. Kevin Hart continues to bring his nervous, comedic energy to the film. Jack Black is a story of his own. His ability to play a character who is both comedic and surprisingly sincere once again makes many scenes genuinely lively. Karen Gillan gets a bit more room for action, and that definitely works in the film's favor. When it comes to themes, the movie continues the line of the previous installments: growing up, friendship, accepting your weaknesses. But here another idea appears: the concept of control over your own world. At a certain point, the characters realize that the game is no longer just a system of levels, but a space that reacts to their decisions. And that's an interesting turn, because suddenly, Jumanji starts to look not just like an adventure, but like a kind of metaphor for growing up. The tone of the film remains fairly light. The humor works in the familiar style of the franchise, a mixture of absurdity, self-irony, and situational comedy. Sometimes the jokes are a little too obvious, but the actors' chemistry still saves many scenes. Kasdan has a good sense of when to pause, let the characters exchange lines, and when to launch another crazy chase. From a directing standpoint, the film looks confident. The action is staged dynamically, and the editing doesn't try to hide what's happening behind chaos. There are several genuinely large-scale sequences, especially in the middle of the film, that are clearly designed for the big screen. The visual effects are also on a strong level. The world of Jumanji has become even more diverse, and at times it resembles a mix of adventure cinema and a next-generation video game. The music works more as support for the atmosphere than as a separate hero of the story. It emphasizes the adventurous tone without trying to pull attention toward itself. And honestly, that's the right decision. If you compare the fourth installment with the previous films in the series, it feels like an attempt to expand the scale of the story a little. In some ways, the film resembles what sequels like Pirates of the Caribbean tried to do. When the world begins to grow, but there's always a risk of losing the simplicity of the original idea. It's interesting to watch how the film works for different audiences. For fans of the series, this is almost guaranteed entertainment. Familiar characters, familiar humor, and spectacular adventure. For those coming into the story for the first time, the film might feel a bit overloaded with rules and references. At the same time, the core dynamics between the characters remain clear enough that you don't get lost in what's happening. After watching it, you're left with the feeling that this is exactly the kind of film you want to talk about. Not because it radically changes the franchise, but because it carefully tests its boundaries. And it raises a natural question. Where can Jumanji actually go from here? Now about the weak points. Sometimes the film relies a little too heavily on the familiar formula. Some plot turns are easy to predict in advance, and certain lines of dialogue sound like we've already heard them in earlier installments. In addition, the middle of the movie is slightly overloaded with events. The characters are constantly running somewhere, but the emotional pauses become shorter. For viewers expecting deeper dramatic weight from the story, this may not be quite enough. Nevertheless, overall Jumanji 4 leaves a pleasant impression. It's not a revolution for the franchise, but it is a fairly confident step forward. The film works as big adventure cinema, bright, loud, sometimes a little chaotic, but still quite charming. My recommendation is this. If you liked the previous installments, this film is almost certainly worth watching. It works best in a movie theater because the scale of the locations and the action scenes truly benefit from the big screen. At home, the story will still work fine, but some of the spectacle will inevitably be lost. Thank you for watching this video. Write in the comments what you think about the Jumanji franchise and whether you're looking forward to the fourth installment. If you found this review helpful, support the channel with a like and a subscription. There are many more conversations about movies ahead.